Welcome to Blue Club. My name's John Schumann. I'm here with my friend Dr. Nick Ford, and we're going to have a chat about mental health and stigma.
Hey John, thanks for asking.
Pleasure. Nick, notwithstanding all the good work done by Beyond Blue and Black Dog Institute and Are You OK, Australians are not very good at dealing with mental illness. Is this ignorance or fear?
I think it's a lot better than it was. I don't think ignorance is the issue. I think fear is something that comes up a lot with mental illness.
Why?
The idea that you could lose your mind and move into a space of pervasive depression, pervasive anxiety, even psychosis, is actually terrifying. I think people try to move away from the idea that that could occur. They create stories. It must be something he did or she did. It must be weakness or vulnerability. I think people are actually frightened of it, and with good reason. It's the most horrible experience known to man.
Cops are, notoriously 10 foot tall and bulletproof. So when a cop comes to see you with a mental health condition, do you have to start dealing with the stigma before you can start to actually help them?
Look, it varies, but it certainly does happen. You get a lot of guys who roll in and they're ashamed of being sent to a psychiatrist or angry about it, and they're bitter. And often you get people who are quite frankly belligerent. That's perfectly okay. Oh, well, it's not okay to be hit, but people do get belligerent, and you try and explain to them that this is something that, if this didn't happen, my job wouldn't exist. And the story about history, this is nothing new, really helps them get with that.
How does stigma manifest itself in the lives of those people who are suffering a mental illness?
Feeling humiliated, feeling ashamed, cutting themselves off from sources of support, talking with friends, even getting out, going to the shop. People feel too ashamed of that. Their brain will play tricks on them, imagine people are judging them and criticising them even when they're not, and they will avoid treatment. They'll say to themselves, I should harden up, I should get over this, I should get through it.
So stigma does interfere with recovery?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
We've talked about this before, but a traumatic episode, a major crash, a suicide, a murder, and two cops front up. One cop emerges from that with a psychological injury, one doesn't. Does that sort of tension between the two reactions set up stigma?
It can do, but in my experience, people are often aware, the team is often aware when one person is suffering more than another, and they often have quite a keen awareness of why that particular person has had that reaction. The variables usually are the nature of the trauma. A parent with kids or a young mum policeman with kids who sees a dead child, it may affect her more than a young man who doesn't have kids, a young male copper. The other one is the fatigue burden. Is that person exhausted? Have they been doing that for quite a long time? Those are the factors that usually come up. The team is usually aware. Where things go pear-shaped sometimes are with command structures and insurers.
Look, I'd like to have a look at a clip from Dark Blue.
Yep.
Look, he's back early.
He was supposed to be a year with Major Crash. He was back in 3 months. Department, are you okay emails?
Traffic 10, the corner of 10.
I don't know of anyone who takes them seriously.
Traffic 10.
Grant. Coffee?
South 1110.
So in that clip, Grant returns from Major Crash early because as a young father he's you know, he's a bit trashed by having to pull a dead kid out of a car. And you can see his colleagues are sneering at him. Clearly they wouldn't sneer at him if he came back with a broken ankle or a dislocated shoulder. What would you say to those two blokes who sneered, you know, look who's back early?
I think they're frightened in themselves. They're frightened of actually experiencing that state of mind. So by discrediting Grant, they're actually illustrating their own fear. I guess you've got to ask them, is that the way you'd like to be treated if something went wrong?
To what extent do you think stigma hinges on the invisibility of a mental health condition?
I think there's a bit of that, although to see somebody who's got a mental health condition, it actually is fairly obvious. But you're right, it's difficult to see in the same way that people talk about back injuries. You can't see a back injury mostly. There are a lot of things that you can't see, but invisibility, not being able to see it, is a problem. We know enough now from neuroimaging and studies that these things are quite real, quite physiological.
I'd like you to have a look at another bit from Dark Blue.
"4 weeks off. Mental health. You know, I didn't do 30 years in this job without a very good bullshit meter. Put your gun back in the locker. And have a nice holiday."
So Grant comes back with a sick certificate which he presents to his sergeant. Sergeant says, as we saw, you know, have a nice holiday. As a clinician, do you get angry when you feel your judgment's being second guessed by, you know, a sergeant in a police station?
I don't get angry anymore. I get frustrated and shake my head and think this is going to take more time and more work than it should do.
What would you say to the sergeant?
Well, I can't say to him, make my life easier, although I'd like to. I probably wouldn't be having that conversation with the sergeant. I'd probably be having that conversation with the inspector. I'd probably be having that conversation with the injury management people. In that case, I'd be drilling down. Did this occur? Was it said this way? Is that helpful? Was there a better way of doing it? And hope that I'd be listened to.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you, do you think you'd be listened to? How widespread do you think stigma is in police stations around Australia?
I don't know around Australia. Certainly in South Australia, there still are issues with it. We do see coppers who come in and soldiers who come in are ashamed of having to be there, ashamed of having time off. It is a hell of a lot better than it was. I think one of the things that you see in any jurisdiction is there's a network of trusted practitioners. In any organisation, there are champions of, say, mental illness who are able to influence the culture of that organisation. It really still is a problem. One of the problems that comes up is when there's a disciplinary issue and you burrow into that and you find that there's actually a history of mental health issues extending back years which have contributed to that disciplinary issue.
I'd like to have another look at a bit from Dark Blue.
Great. Department email. And then they trialled psych visits.
12.
I was thinking about it myself, but who wants to be seen going to the psych with the wobblies?
127 Hillbank Road, Harbour. Advise immediately on arrival.
God, yeah.
It wasn't the smartest idea they've ever had.
North Talk, Roger.
So somebody had the bright idea of bringing the psychologist into the police station. Was that a good idea?
No, I think it's going out to see the psychologist, going out to see the psychiatrist. When you're having a one-to-one personal conversation, it needs to be kept one-to-one personal and away from prying eyes. It is the case that sometimes it's useful for psychiatrists and psychologists to be wandering around a unit so the unit's aware of them. This happens a lot, for example, in the American Armed Forces, where the psychiatrists and psychologists actually attached at usually a regiment level, about 2,000 men. But the one-to-one chats are best outside. It's personal, private business.
Again, let's have a look at this bit.
South 9.
I'd have to say you're almost looking good. I mean, almost, not quite.
Almost.
Yeah, almost.
Thank you.
You're welcome. That's what I'm here for. Yeah. No more greys. Must have done you good, eh?
Should we be trusting him with a loaded weapon?
Speak to John, mate.
Got put to work, didn't you?
Oh, just a bit around the garden and a bit of painting, but...
Oh, yeah.
Got to...
As like.
So, should we be sending him out on patrol with a loaded weapon? He's been a bit on edge lately.
I'll keep an eye on it.
Thanks, sir.
Yeah, you still inviting Uncle John over? Or is...
So, your experience, do cops not report mental health issues because of career or stigma or both?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Both?
Yep. Career and stigma. If I've had a mental health issue, the other guys will regard me as unreliable and untrustworthy, or I will admit that I'm weak. The issue that gradually comes up is I think there's enough coppers, and particularly in the military, which are the lab rats for this kind of study, for people to realise that people's careers can and do move on, that people can and do recover.
So let's be clear here. What you're saying is you can have a psychological injury or a mental health condition and you can fully recover.
Seen it happen on a number of occasions.
And back to work, fully operational, doing what you were doing beforehand.
Oh, Lord, yes, absolutely. There's a whole bunch of coppers out there who I've seen back fully operational. I know that things are going well because I hear from their friends or I hear from other sources within injury management. With soldiers, I've seen guys actually redeploy and go back to Afghanistan and serve with merit.
So we agreed earlier that stigma can be a major roadblock on the way back to recovery. What can we all do to eradicate stigma?
Videos like this really help. One of the things that does come up is the copper's reaction when he goes back to the workplace. He will often see people as more rejecting and negative than they actually are, and that can set up a tension. The copper going back to the workplace does need to accept that the other coppers will be wondering whether he can be relied, whether he can be trusted in a high conflict situation. Trust is restored over time. So what we're trying to get that copper to do to prove himself more and more. One of the things we've got to accept is that your average copper's a highly valuable piece of kit, that there are ways of nurturing him back to work which don't involve cotton wooling, of actually pushing him further and further back toward operational duties.
I was listening to the ABC the other day and Pat McGorry was on and he came up with a statistic which frankly gobsmacked me, and it was quite different to all the statistics that I have been aware of. He said that 84% of Australians under the age of 45 will have a mental illness. That seems to be gobsmacking.
Yeah, look, that's a pretty high figure and certainly higher than I've heard before. It's probably closer to 30 or 40%. Of those, the majority are going to be pretty mild conditions which are largely self-limiting, managed at a general practice or psychology level, but it's a huge number.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, to what extent stigma will be diminished if everybody understands that it's very common.
I think we like to think of our brains as fail-proof. We need to accept that our brains have got limitations, that they will fold under various circumstances, and these are the ways to refold them or stop them unfolding in the first place. There needs to be conversations about that, about resilience and about the next steps to take when the resilience fails.
I'd like us to look at this bit from Dark Blue and then have a bit of a yarn about it.
I was so proud of Grant that day. Mum said never marry a cop. Guess it's too late for that now. Being married to a cop wasn't so bad after all. With Grant around, we always felt safe.
All right, little one. Time to get you out of here.
He's such a great dad. Things were going really well.
So there is Grant at graduation day. You know, his career, his future opens out before him. His wife is saying how safe she feels with Grant as a cop. Somehow or other, in this story, which is a real story, Grant moves from optimism to deep black despair. How common is that?
I think about 10 to 15% of coppers will have a mental illness at one time, and then the number increases over time. I just want to hold you to one thought. The lady said at the start, the wife said at the start that she feels safe because Grant's a copper. The reality is the community feels safe, sometimes a little annoyed when we've been caught speeding, because there are coppers around.
Yeah. Again, Dark Blue.
You're a risk, Grant. You're a risk to yourself and everyone around you. Application for motorcycle unit. You know that requires a psych exam. You'd be lucky to make the bicycle unit. When this investigation is complete, you'll be lucky if you've still got a job.
So that sergeant, when he looked at Grant and said, "You're a risk, Grant. You're a risk to yourself and everybody around you." I mean, that would be devastating, absolutely devastating, particularly if he's feeling, very fragile, which he is, obviously. If you were counselling that sergeant as a clinician, not as a human being, as a clinician, what would you say to him?
I'd be hedging toward the statement, and I'd need to approach this carefully, along the statement of, since when did contempt and humiliation become useful training methods? They simply don't work. So what that guy is doing is he's taking a wound and pouring salt on it. It's just not going to help. It's going to make things worse.
What should he do?
Mate, that was a really tough time. You're going to need some time off. I'm really worried about you at the moment. I don't think you're safe to be working, so we're going to take you off. Now, the reality is a copper in that frame of mind, having access to loaded weapons and tactical options and high-speed vehicles may not be good to be working. But that can be phrased in a way that emphasises this is a likely time-limited condition, and to emphasise that they're going to want him back. And there's heaps of data. This is just not a hokey statement. There's heaps of data on this type of thing that goes back to the mid-1970s.
Another bit from Dark Blue.
we're sworn, without favour or affection, without malice or ill will, sworn to keep and preserve the peace. Karen, please forgive me. But this is the best that I can do for you. I'm sorry for not being good enough, and for not being the father that our kids deserve. I thought I was strong enough to help everyone, but turns out that I'm not. You deserve more than to be burdened with me. Sorry I couldn't be more. I love you.
To what extent do you think we can attribute suicidal thoughts and suicide attempts to stigma? Big question. Sorry to throw it at you.
To a large extent. The nature of depression is that you feel, A, there's no hope, and that there's no point in engaging with others. So that is one of the triggers for suicide attempts. The fact that other people are ignoring, not paying attention, not being alert, that is a factor.
So what would you, Nick Ford, psychiatrist, highly regarded in this field, what would you say to every senior manager and every cop who's sniggered at a mental health condition?
This is simply not the way to treat a valuable piece of community kit that costs you quite a bit of money to train. This is telling us more about you than it is the copper, and that humiliation and contempt, as we've said before, are not ways of training people, not ways of managing people.
Thanks, Nick.
I joined the force about the same time Grant did.
There's nothing you can do, sweet.
Grant.
Coffee?
Should we be trusting him with a loaded weapon? He's been a bit on edge lately.
Shut your mouth. I'm trying to get this under control here.
Don't talk to me.
I now need you to come back to the police station.
Fucking jacket, you idiot!
You're a risk, Grant. You're a risk to yourself and everyone around you.
It was dark, mate. Anyone could have made the same mistake. It's what I wrote in my report. Grant! They never said it would be like this.